Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis LA and Dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, could I please speak with Sarah?
This is she.
Hello, this is Paul Holdengräber calling you from the Quarantine Tape. Thank you so much for taking time to be part of this show. It must be hard, actually, for you to take time off, I imagine.
Hi, Paul. Today is actually my day off, and I managed to get some errands done. Working 12 hours, definitely, it's physically exhausting.
I imagine. So do you have one day off a week?
No, actually, this week I have 2 days off. So it's today and tomorrow.
Tell us, so that we all know what your days are like. You're a nurse in New York, and I just would like to know what life is like for you and what it's been like for the last 4 months, and I'll ask you many more questions in a moment.
So I work in an emergency department in New York City. The last couple of months have been a fluctuation of events, emotions, and hobbies. Going back to March and April, that's when New York was hit with COVID, and we were seeing a lot of death. And it was unpredictable. And I think a lot of my colleagues became ill. We were struggling with staffing, resources, and processing everything that was happening. Moving forward up to today, things are much calmer, which is still very strange to us. We went from one extreme to the other. With our senses now being low, it's allowed us to process everything. So some people have taken some time off to spend with the family, to do self-care. And so things have been much, much better now.
But you haven't.
I have been. I think I am back to my normal self now. I have to say that I wasn't doing so well.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it because, we obviously hear so much about the extraordinary pain that the patients are feeling, and we might get to that in a moment. But I'd like to know maybe you can take us through what life was initially.
I think one of the things that I struggle with is I was, angry. I was angry because this was something that was anticipated. This virus was first in China back in December, Italy in January. Our first case in the U.S. Was back in February. And by mid-March, all 50 states had COVID. And so we were all hearing and reading about what was quickly unfolding in Italy. And I think we could have done better. We could have prepared better. But more importantly, I think our patients deserved better. I remember when we first had our COVID case in our ER, we were all frantic, running around, trying to isolate this patient, notifying our superiors and just doing everything that, the whole process of it. And that was taken care of because it was one patient. And the next week after that, it was as if months had passed by. We were overrun with very, very sick people. We had our ambulances lining up and the patients on gurneys. That line just was out the ambulance bay lined up. We had nurses running around assisting with intubation, cardiac arrest. It was truly traumatizing. I think our physicians were breaking down. They were struggling to make a decision as to who can go to the ICU. And that was heartbreaking. I felt anxious, despair, and again, I think angry. The pressure was truly nauseating. There were times where I realized 8 to 9 hours had gone by and I hadn't had a sip of water or gone on a bathroom break. And I remember feeling somewhat abused to be working like this.
When you were talking about the doctors having to decide who would go to the ICU unit, is that what we read about when we read about triage?
So essentially, what happens is when a patient comes in and they're very, very sick, we stabilize them in the ER, and then we call the ICU to come and see the patient. And so at that point, ICU then decides whether or not the ICU team decides whether the patient will come up to ICU. During this crisis, our doctors had to choose which got to go. And ICU was very limited with space and equipment as well.
What was the criteria to decide?
That would be more a question for a physician, I think.
What did you notice?
I think as a nurse, what I've seen, and this is, again, I'm not a physician, a few of the things that they consider is the age of the patient, comorbidities, and how likely are they to survive their current condition.
How long, Sarah, how long did you remain angry? Because I imagine anger could, if it lasted, get in the way of what you needed to do. It might have been a fuel at one moment, but then I imagine, I don't know what I imagine, you tell me. I'm just curious, how you, Sarah, handled this, because there's the handling of these extremely sick patients, but then there's the handling of Sarah in the hospital and the relationships you entertained with other nurses and with doctors, and quite frankly with yourself.
I think, when I was at work, my focus was really to do the best that I can, to help out the best that I can. And so you really had no time to process anything. It was a constant revolving door of sick people, a shortage of supplies and resources. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. And so we have to work with what we're given. And, again, my focus is just do the best that I can. And I think the anger was absolutely not towards my colleagues or, my patients. I think it was more with the institution. I think this lasted probably up until May. And the only reason why I was even aware of this anger was by talking to a colleague. And, there was no time to check in with each other. And so when this all, was in control and our senses was low, we had time to now talk to each other and see how we were doing. And so as I was talking to my colleague, he said to me, "Wow, you're angry." And I said, "Am I? I guess I am."
When you say institution, what are you referring to?
I mean that because this was something that was predicted months ahead, I think one can predict that the nurses will get sick. And so we need to replace them. We need to make sure we have extra hands. That was not done. There was a consistent shortage of essential supplies like oxygen tanks, face masks, and other important things that an ER should have. And so our patients were arriving so sick, and we were so helpless because we did not have enough resources.
I know this is very difficult, but take me inside the hospital and take me to the worst day you had.
Let's see here. Well, I remember walking in one day, finding out that we were working with half of our normal staffing. And basically more than half of our ER was an ICU station. Our patients that were going up to ICU were still in our ER. And I remember seeing a patient that was being dropped off by an ambulance, and they were going to place the patient in a room. And as I was walking there, as soon as the patient was placed on a bed, I realized that she stopped breathing. And so at that point, I checked her pulse, and there was no pulse. So I start doing compressions. And I turned around to get help. There was no one near me. I remember shouting for help. No one could hear me because the bells were going off, the alarms were going off, and no one could hear me shouting for help. And I was doing compressions for 2 minutes alone. And I felt so anxious at that point until 2 minutes of compressions is a very long time, by the way. It's exhausting. But then I did see one of our techs walk by, and I said, please get a doctor. And so he ran and got a doctor. A doctor came over, and it was just me and the doctor trying to get a pulse on the patient. Normally, in a situation like this, you would have at least 2 more nurses. But in this case, it was just me and the doctor. And I will never forget that time.
And were you able to get a pulse back?
Unfortunately, we did not.
I mean, what you're describing is so difficult, and the strain must be so difficult. And I'm wondering what the strain was also within the hospital between you and the other nurses. You said there was nearly no possibility of speaking to each other and checking in with each other. But perhaps you could describe a little more how you worked together under such predictable, as you said, circumstances, but circumstances for which you were really not prepared to deal with this extraordinary predicament you had in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did we did our best, and we knew that this was a hard time for everybody, and so the teamwork was there. And I was so humbled by both our nurses, our technicians, and our doctors, how hard we all worked. Despite everything else, despite not, asking, hey, how you're doing, everyone came into work. The moment that they walked in, they got right to it. And so I'm so grateful and so proud to say this. At work, it was just, our mindset was just work, work, and work. And so I look back, and no one was really complaining. There was no chance. There was no moment to complain.
Right.
So the teamwork was really strong.
More specifically, take me. You described one situation which is so sad and devastating. What was a normal, if one can use that word, and of course I use it, understanding that it's hardly normal, but what was a normal day like in, let's say, late March?
Late March, a normal day.
Or mid-April, Sarah. I'm just at the height of being overwhelmed and unprepared.
So when we walk in through those doors, and as soon as you walk in, there are patients, sick patients, sitting on chairs and stretchers all over the hallways. Past the ER, stretchers in the hallways. You have patients sitting on chairs, most, if not all of them, with masks on their faces, sweating, coughing. And so the minute you walk in, you have to have that mask on and your face shield on, if there was any available, of course. And then you would walk into the main ER and see more sick patients. Now, as you get closer to the main ER, you would see them intubated with ventilators. The nurses and doctors walk right past you. They don't have time to say hi or anything. Walk right by you. You come in, you get your patients, and you start your day. That's pretty much it. And like I said, Paul, hours could go by so quickly, and you don't realize that you haven't had a sip of water. I remember looking back, I felt lightheaded many times, and I said, is this because I haven't eaten anything? Is it because is it my mask? Yes. It was many things. It was the mask, the constant breathing in of your own breath, the lack of hydration, the lack of food. And so this was it, 12 hours back to back.
12 hours, 5 days a week?
Actually, 3 to 4 days a week. It depends. Yeah.
During this time, you've said that things have gotten better now. How so?
So now we are seeing our patients with non-COVID complaints come in. So complaints like headaches, chest pain, belly pain, muscle pain, they're now coming to the ER. And so we're not seeing an influx of patients who need immediate life-saving interventions anymore. What has also happened, Paul, is we've had physicians and nurses come from other states to help us out.
I want you to talk about that a little bit.
Yes. Unfortunately, Paul, when they came, it was after the peak of COVID here. And although I was so grateful and so relieved to see all these new faces come in, the extra hands, it was after everything had happened. But the good thing is that because they are now, some people were giving time off to take care of their mental health, and so it's been nice to see new faces and have the opportunity to extend our leaves.
When you use the word mental health, do you mean that for some of the nurses in particular, this caused a mental strain which they need to take care of now, or what were you referring to when you said mental health?
Yes. So mental health illnesses were all too common amongst everybody. things like PTSD, anxiety, insomnia, depression, suicide ideations. This was something that there was a stigma, I think, before COVID that healthcare professionals don't have this, can't experience this. And so COVID...
Really? I'm unaware of that. Explain that to me. I do like that you laughed a little bit there.
Well, I laugh because I think it's kind of silly that that there's that people think that healthcare professionals, healthcare workers don't experience mental health illnesses. I think again those mental health illnesses were something that got a lot of attention recently, and our institution has provided hotlines and to reach out to therapists and psychologists to talk about what happened. It was truly traumatic. And although, one can talk to your family members and your colleagues, I do think, and I strongly recommend that one should seek mental health, professional mental help. Did
you?
I did, Paul. And I'm not ashamed to admit this. I did.
Why? Why would one be ashamed? I mean, when you break a leg, you get a plaster. You get when you hurt yourself, and the brain is but another organ.
That's right. I actually heard something similar from a close friend of mine, who said to me, it's as if you broke a leg.
Right.
It's an injury that you have, and it needs healing. And so, since then, I have had, I picked up on different hobbies.
Yes, you mentioned that at the beginning, that it has been a moment where some hobbies have come to the foreground. Tell me about them too.
Yes, I have been reading more.
What have you been reading?
Different things, different books, fictional books. So right now I'm reading, actually, I am reading a book called The Obstacle is the Way, which is more of a self-care book. But my books range from drama to self-care. Amongst reading, I've also picked up watercolors, and I actually bought an adult coloring book. I am doing more cooking now. I'm trying new recipes. So these are a few things that I've picked up.
That's what offered you in some way solace when you got home. Was that a ritual? Did you create rituals for yourself leaving the hospital?
Yes. That I think having a routine was really helpful to de-stress and recharge so that I am okay and I can go and continue to do my job in the best way that I can.
Recently I had occasion to speak to a doctor at Stanford, Abraham Verghese, who spoke quite eloquently of the fact that doctors need to do two things. They hope to cure when they can, but they can't always. But if they can't cure, they hope to heal. I'm wondering how that resonates with you, Sarah.
I think, our job and as a nurse and working closely with our physicians is to make our patients feel better. Now, whether that is pain or to understand what is happening with their bodies. But also, we also, at least where I work, I see that we do a really good job asking our patients, if how are they doing, and if they understand what happened to them during their visit in the ER. And I think that piece right there at the very end, just having that talk, is is really good for both the healthcare provider and the patient.
In speaking with some of the doctors I've spoken to over the last couple of months, they've spoken about the real difficulty this pandemic has caused between patients, doctors, and their families, because families so often have not been able to see a family member afflicted by this pandemic. Have you witnessed many such situations?
Yeah, at work we had a strict visitation policy. So essentially, no one but the patient was allowed, and this was to protect the visitors. And it was heartbreaking to pull them away like that in such rush because they were sick, and to take them in right away and tell them, sorry, but you can't come in. And the patient, they're sick and they're alone, and one can only spend so much time with them because we've got the next patient to see.
Right.
Yeah.
Going back to your anger, if I can, for a moment, as we come to the end of this conversation, sadly. So there was great anger, Sarah, and things got a little bit better maybe over time, also maybe when things got a little bit better. When you look back, some people have spoken of the pandemic as a portal, as a possibility for change. What kind of change do you think needs to happen so that when Sarah confronts another such terrible moment, things are different? And instead of anger, maybe there's preparedness, there's a sense of being more ready insofar that one can be.
I think being prepared is what really would help everyone, mentally mostly. And if we're prepared, and if we know that going to work, we have the right gear and the right resources, along with adequate staffing, then I think that we would be able to feel less anxious and be mentally ready to take on, everything else that can walk in through our ERs. I think that would be the answer to all of this, is just being prepared.
But also probably the medical establishment would need to change, what you call the institution.
That's right. Yes. Unfortunately, it's very hard to point to just one institution. I just think the U.S. overall just did very poorly. It was in response to this virus. I do think that one big aspect of all this is mental health. It really affected us. And there's layers and layers of this. It's more than just the physical exhaustion.
You're feeling better now?
So much better, Paul. So much better. I have great friends. I have a great support system. And like I said, a lot of self-care. And I think one thing for me is gratitude. I'm just grateful. I feel lucky and I'm blessed. I did not get sick, Paul. I tested negative. And many aspects to being in quarantine, I think it's just one thing is just feeling grateful. I'm very grateful.
Sarah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Stay safe. I hope.
Thank you, Paul.
I hope things improve greatly for you, and thank you for everything you do for everyone else. And don't forget yourself.
Of course, Paul. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
All the best to you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.